Welcome to A Meaningful Life, a podcast dedicated to helping you live a beautiful and deeply meaningful life. I'm Kelly Patterson Smith, and I believe that when we live with intention and appreciation for the world around us, a life full of joy, peace, and purpose is possible. We only get one shot at this, and I don't know about you, but I want to reach my highest potential in this lifetime. I want to align with my true purpose and do everything I was created to do. Maybe you feel the same way. If so, I encourage you to open your heart and mind as we take a journey together to grow and discover what it means to live a meaningful life. Welcome back to A Meaningful Life, everybody. I am so excited to share my conversation with Emily Lex with you. She is an artist, author, blogger, and what I like to call creator of beautiful things. Her 3-month trip around the country in an RV with her family was featured by Joanna Gaines in Magnolia Journal. And Emily recently released her first book called Freely and Lightly, God's Gracious Invitation to a Life of Quiet Confidence. And let me just tell you, this book is the most beautiful book you will ever see. It's beautifully written. It's beautifully designed. I just thoroughly enjoyed reading this book. And she also makes these beautiful guided watercolor books. My son and I actually love to do these together. We bought the holiday ones and did them together leading up to the holidays. And we just got the animal one. So as you can tell, I'm just a huge fan of Emily's work. I've been a fan of her work for a long, long time. So I was so honored when she agreed to chat with me for this podcast, because after reading her book, I had so many questions I wanted to ask her, and boy, did she deliver. Here's my conversation with the talented and delightful Emily Lex. Emily, thank you for making some time for this conversation today. I really appreciate it.
Of course. I'm so happy to be here.
So there are literally 500 million things I want to ask you about, but today I'd love to talk to you about your book, Freely and Lightly. It's such an incredible, beautiful book. I read the whole thing. It was just stunning to open it and look at how beautiful. Even my husband's like, this is the prettiest book I've ever seen. But the content in the book, too, that was so impactful. So first of all, thank you for creating such an amazing thing and for pouring your heart out on these pages, because it has had a massive impact in my life. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It is such a pretty book. And it's one of those that, like, I'm so proud of it. And I made part of it. But my publisher, I think, did such a nice job. I love the way that things look and feel. And so they really were so kind to do that for me and give me like really nice pages and really nice, all the color illustrations and the ribbon thing. So they definitely went over and above anything I could have hoped for this. So yes.
Yes. Huge fan of the ribbon too, by the way. This is
it's so funny.
Yeah. Because we have ribbons in our journals. I'm like, what a great idea to put it in an actual book. It was so helpful because I wasn't scrambling for my bookmark.
Yeah, right. I know. It's nice.
So I wanted to start today talking about your journey to living freely and lightly and what this means. But first, I'd love to know, was there a big turning point? Was there something that happened that made you, I know a lot of this is in the book, but for those that haven't read it yet, was there something that happened that made you want to make a shift in your life?
Gosh, this is where like, I wish that there could just be one, like, and then God said, do this. And it was like, and then it was the moment. I just don't think that that's how it works. That's not how it worked in my life. I don't know that it's how it works in a lot of people's lives. I think what I call it is like a slow waking up, where there were just little things that just would catch my attention of like, this doesn't feel right. Or why am I so upset about this? Or why does this make me feel so insecure? And so it was just learning to pay attention to those little signposts, I guess, that were telling me there's something off. There were things that were kind of in my soul, but then also like my body was physically sick. And I think that tipped me off to this, like, something is not right. I'm 40 years old, or 35 years old is kind of when it started. And there's just something that's not quite right. So that's, I think, what the invitation into uncovering, like, why do I have all of these really wonderful things in my life, and yet I'm still so unsatisfied and deeply insecure? What is wrong with me? I wish it was one thing, but I just think it was a lot of things.
So what was the first thing you did? Because I think so many people can relate to how that you were feeling. So what was like step one for you when you started noticing all of these things?
I don't know that I really talk about it much in the book, but when I try to explain kind of this process, I think that the more that I started going through this, and then ultimately when I was writing this book, I realized this is what spiritual formation is. This is the process of spiritual formation. And it's not necessarily linear, but I think that I was able to identify some kind of steps along the way. And I don't know that it exactly looks like this in everyone's life, but maybe it's helpful for me to explain it this way. So if you hold your hands out in front of you and you fist them with your thumbs down, that's kind of the posture where I started, where it was like I was looking to all of the things in my life and just grabbing on so tightly. Mm-hmm. And so then with some awareness of like, okay, I'm grasping, I'm like stressed out, I'm striving, my body has physical ailments because of this like stress that I'm holding, which some of it was just from my family of origin and some issues that happened in my life. But some of it also was just my doing of just looking to the world to find my value. And so then I think the next step is just after you've recognized like, oh my gosh, I'm holding on so tight, then it's just turning those fists over so that now your thumbs are pointed up and opening up your hands. And so that really was that next step for me, was recognizing, whoa, there's something going on. And then turning my hands over and saying like, okay, God, I'm going to release these things, which is really, really, really hard because these are the things that are making me feel safe and comfortable. But as I open up my hands and you start to release the things that are actually keeping me bound, even though they look like they're keeping me safe, they're actually keeping me bound. And then once your hands are open, now God can start to kind of fill them in with like, what is actually true? So it's that kind of formation of what your beliefs are. And then now that your hands are open, you're like, I wish you could see my body right now, but your hands are now offering yourself to the world. So where I started by grabbing from the world, whatever it is that would make me feel safe or comfortable or secure or like I was valued or enough, now my hands are open because God has filled me with those things. He now tells me who I am. So now I can just use who I am to offer it to the world without needing to grab back. So does that kind of make sense?
It 100% makes sense.
Okay.
And it leads me back to your hydrangea pruning story.
Mm-hmm.
Here it is. This like segues perfect into this. This is something you write in your book, and I'd love to like expand upon this. So you say, for those of you that haven't read the book, this is a section where she's talking about pruning her hydrangeas and the message that it held. And I think it's such a great one. Sometimes there are so many offshoots and crisscrossing branches, the poor thing can't figure out where to send nutrients. Unless some are cleared out, the whole plant suffers. And it's not always about cutting off the old and dead. At times, perfectly fine parts are removed for the sake of the plant and its ongoing health and potential to thrive. I just was like, whoa, I just got goosebumps again reading it because that is so, so true. And I think when you were talking a moment ago about how difficult it is to let go or to remove these things from your life. So can you talk about that pruning process in your own life?
Yeah, well, it was actually interesting writing that part because I was Googling. I mean, I'm not really a gardener. My mom comes over and she like prunes things and she's so good at it. And that's not really what I like, can cut the dead blooms off.
Yeah.
But when I did just a Google search on like, how do you prune things? It was really interesting that you're not always cutting off the dead things. You're also you're making space so that things can grow in a healthy way. And it really did give like a little bit of additional meaning to that pruning that can happen where there might be good things in your life or good opportunities, but that doesn't mean that those are the best opportunities for you that are going to actually result in the best growth that God has for you. So let me think if I can think of an example. Here, this is the example that comes to mind. I want to be a mom who's super involved in my kids' school. And it feels like that's the right way to be a mom, is to like be involved in the PTA and all of the school things. Well, if God has called me to this work of writing this book during that season, I really didn't have a lot of time to go volunteer at the kids class. Kids class stuff is awesome. There's nothing wrong with that. But the work that he called me to in that season was book writing, which meant that I needed to let go of some of those other things. So those were not bad things. It was just in order for him to grow me and do this work that he called me to, I had to let go of some other things. I don't know if that's the very best example, but I think it's helpful. There are some things in my life also that he had to prune, like my insatiable desire for control. That had to be pruned away, but that's actually kind of a bad thing. So there's also some good things that need to go so that you can do the work that he actually has for you.
I think that's a perfect example and a much more simplified version for me in my own life. One thing that I've had to prune out of my life is watching the news and watching TV. That was clogging up space in my own life. On the most simple version of it, your favorite Netflix show can seem like a good, fun thing to do, but it's also taking up space for something that could be of greater purpose.
Yes, totally. I think it's just that awareness of, I don't know, I just think that God is really good and he wants us to have joy and peace and hope and fulfillment in our lives. And we're really good at just filling our lives with a whole bunch of stuff that maybe that's not like where the end is going to be for those things. So there is just this walking through life with an awareness of who he says I am, what the things that he's kind of put on my heart to do in this season. I don't know that it always stays the same. And then looking at your life and saying, am I actually following him? Am I doing those things? Or are there other things that are just getting in the way and distracting? And they might be really good things, or they might be really bad things.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, don't you think too, it's an important element would be curiosity about the things? Because I think the way you've explained your spiritual development and your connection with God and how it's grown and how it's evolved in the book, I also sense a lot of curiosity for things that have shown up for you, because I know even in my own life, things come up and you're like, oh, that's interesting. And I've become a lot more curious. So how does curiosity play a role for you?
Yeah, I think that's great. What it made me think of is that I'm the type of person who, when someone has a suggestion for me or an idea for me, or like, you should do this, I'm really quick to be like, oh, okay, you think I should do that? I think maybe I should do that then. And I just like jump into things really quickly because someone else suggests it, or it's an opportunity, or it feels like, oh, well, that sounds fun. So I guess I'll just do it. And I think that this process for me, this kind of was like a 7-year journey, has brought me to a place where now I can really say, okay, I know who I am because of who God made me. And I've really gotten to know the personality and the work that he has for me. And now, instead of just hearing someone else say, you should try this, it's now, I think it is probably curiosity that says, okay, that's a super fun idea, but let me just check and decide, is that what God's calling me to? Is that really in line with like who I am? Or is that me just like, I don't know, sure, let's try that. Let's try that. I just want to make decisions from a more settled place in my life than just trying everything that comes my way.
And how do you decipher the difference between the two? Like, how do you know that this is for me, or no, this sounds fun, but I don't think that's for me?
I think it's just a slowness, which is countercultural, because I think like an opportunity comes our way and we're like, we got to jump on it right now or else that's going to pass us by. And so it is that kind of worry that now is the only chance that I have to take. So for me, it's like really pausing and taking some time to really think through it. What are the long-term implications of this if I say yes to it? And in fact, I read that in the book about, I love bar class and Pilates. And my bar instructor said like, hey, we'd love for you to come join our like teacher training program. And at first I hear that and I'm like, oh my gosh, my bar teacher, she approves of me. She wants me to do this. She thinks I'm really good at bar. So she wants me to teach it, which is so flattering. And so I'm like, well, then I should probably do it. And then I stop and I think through, what would that actually look like a year from now? And I'm going to show up in bar class now having to teach instead of just going and letting it be like a fun thing that I do. Now I have the responsibility of being a teacher and I don't actually want that for my life. So as flattering as that invitation was, that's actually not what I want in my life. I think it's just really that like slow intention, thinking through the steps. I'm not super great at that because I'm very like in the moment. I think scripture says it a million times, take every thought captive, run it through that filter of taking the time. Is this really what God has for me? And then it's just a matter of like discerning what God has for you, which is hard. There's not like a one size fits all on that. But for me, a lot of times it's journaling and just really like getting down to the bottom of like, how do I actually feel about this? And for me, it takes journaling it out more than talking it out. And that's something I've just learned about myself.
Oh, I just love the references. I'm a huge journaler myself. So I would love to know more about your journaling process. Is it just kind of a brain dump and you just write when you feel like writing, or do you have a particular process or time that you journal?
Yeah, I think it's probably different in different seasons. Right now, I can usually tell when there's just something inside of me that feels a little unsettled, that I don't really know how I think. I don't really know what I think until I sit and I write it down. And so usually that's what happens. Like I can just kind of feel that like unsettledness in me and I need to sit down. I need to just type out my words. So yesterday I was in the car and I was like, I had these like swirling thoughts and I was picking up my kiddo. And so I had a few minutes. And so I just got my notes app out. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times I'll like journal on the notes app on my phone just because it's like right there in the moment. But I have lots of journals. I keep one in my bag at all times. I have one with my Bible stuff. So it really is just like my way of processing is I have to write it down. Sometimes I will go through an actual like structured journaling. So there's one I talk about in the book where I went through the Gospels. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and each day was a different chapter. And so there was like a particular way of journaling through that, which was incredible. Usually it just looks like I have a thought, or a lot of times it's questions that I'm asking and just kind of like working through those questions. Sometimes there'll be a scripture that I'll write down, and then I love looking them up in all the different versions and see like what words stick out or what phrases. And that usually kind of sparks something in me. It's pretty organic usually. How about you? How do you journal?
Oh, I think that's so great. I have two very young children. So I have a 5-year-old, almost 6-year-old, and a 3-year-old. My biggest struggle is I can't journal as much as I want to. Like when I'm trying to sort some stuff out, like I really want to sit down. So the way I'm doing it now is I do a gratitude journal. So I write down some things that I'm grateful for. And then I write down some goals I have for myself. I keep a couple different journals. So I have a gratitude, and I try to do it every day, but I'm working on a big project right now for a company. So I'm slacking on it, if I'm being honest. But I also keep a journal for my sons. I have one for each, and I write down like the funny things they say, or just like little memories I want to remember. And then of course, my husband and I make a family travel journal and a holiday journal. So we definitely use that every holiday and every time we take a trip, and building a collection there for our boys. So there's a couple of different ways, little pieces of journaling I'm doing. But once they get in school, your book has actually inspired me to go a little deeper with the journaling because I love, the story about how you sorted through the thing, your past with your father, and then the way you journaled the messages that you received from God. It had such an impact on me. And I was like, this is the kind of journaling I want to do when the time is appropriate. I can't just sit down and journal for 30 minutes right now, but I just love how the way you use journaling to sort through those things, because it's just such an important processing tool.
Yeah. Well, and the thing about it is like yesterday I was in the car and it was probably 8 minutes, maybe, while I was waiting for Brady to get out of his group. And so, yes, when your kids are little, it's like, oh, if I only had more time. That is totally true. And like, I've been through that season. I have 4 kids, and like for 10 years, there was a lot of like just babies. But also it doesn't have to look like you light a candle, it's perfectly quiet, because that's not always the reality too. So sometimes it's just sneaking away, or half the time the kids will get out of the car and I'll just sit in the car for a few more minutes, just process, or sitting on the front porch and the kids are playing or whatever, but I have a few minutes. So it is so hard when the kids are little, and there's just getting quiet is very challenging. So now that I have some older kids, it's a little easier for me. But you can kind of find little cracks of time if that's the best way for you to process too.
Yeah, that's what I need. I need to pull out the notes app more because, that is a good idea. I need to start doing it.
Well, and it was funny when I wrote the book, I printed out so many of the notes that I had written on my notes app were words that I ended up having in the book because they were already written. So that was a very convenient way for me to write a book, because I had paper journals, but I also had a ton of just times that I had just written on the computer. Sometimes I think it's faster to type. So I would just kind of like write things on my computer. The means to the end is what's important. End is that I'm able to like express my feelings, because I can't do it verbally, or I'm not very good at it. So it's just taking care of yourself. But if you're not a person who needs to express it through words, there is no shame in not being a journaler. If you have a friend that you can talk to and that's the way you process, also, that's incredible.
Exactly. Guys, I don't know about you, but I reached total overwhelm with all the photos on my phone. Gosh, we live in a world with so many pictures and the pressure to take so many pictures. And it was taking away from my quality of life, I got to tell you. So I made a major change. I'm doing things totally different now. I started taking 2 good pictures at every experience and adventure I have with my family, and then started writing down my memories instead in a journal. And let me tell you, I feel so much better. It's helping me be more present with my family. It takes the pressure off of always feeling like I need to take a ton of photos so I don't forget anything. And boy, am I going to love looking at these memories years down the road, and so will my family. I mean, photos only tell part of the story, right? I personally started using the family travel journal and holiday journals that I created with my husband for our company called Archive Collection. And my parents used the grandparent journal to document their time and memories with our sons. So if you'd like a simpler way to start capturing and organizing your family memories in a much more meaningful way, go to www.archivecollection.co to see if there's a journal that you might like for your family. And don't forget to use code Meaningful Life while you're there to get 10% off your order. Now, let's get back to the interview. I bet it was so cool for you to see all these little notes and journal excerpts you've been taking over all this time come together for you in this book. I mean, that had to be a cool moment. Like, oh, this is the reason all those things came to me at the time that they did. I needed them.
I know. I never intended to write this story down, but it really was. I tell the story in the very, very back of the book that it really was this moment where I felt like God said, okay, it's time to write and it's time to share the story. And I've been a blogger for so many years, and so I'm very public in a lot of ways, but like these are my most precious thoughts inside me. Yeah. And I never intended for these to be public. And yet I'm just really trusting that the way of growth in other people might be hearing the vulnerable stories of people just like them. And so I just keep trusting that like my stories, while I never went through this with an intention of sharing it publicly, I just trust that God's going to do what he needs to do with this story.
I completely understand.
It did make the writing process a lot easier when I had so many things written down.
Such a huge impact. So I hope you realize that.
Well, thank you. I hope so.
So we'll move on to, I love how you talk about your word being abide. And I'm curious, is that still your power word?
I was just with some friends. We were talking about tattoos. And that's one of the things that I say, like, I should probably get that tattooed on my arm so that I will always remember what that means. I just read a verse yesterday and the word abide came up again. So yeah, I mean, I think it's just this staying connected and that the Lord stays connected with us and we stay connected with him, and like life will go better that way. And so, yeah, I have just this real inclination, as I think most people do, to kind of be for myself and to protect myself and to want my own good instead of remembering, actually, I have a God who is so much better than I am, who wants my good. Like he is good intention towards me. And why would I not want to be connected with that? So yeah, I do think that word abide just continues. It's a good one.
So another thing in your book that I really, really related to, this is when you talked about how you're wired to do. I'm a total doer myself. Almost to a fault. I'm like, let's get this done. And you talk about how Jesus asks us to be. So I was wondering from your perspective, like, what does it mean to be and how can we do a better job, especially when we live in a world where we want to accomplish and it sometimes requires a lot of doing. I mean, you have a big business, you know this. So what is your perspective on all of that?
Again, I think we just maybe go back to like just slowing down, just taking a breath. And not being so frantic about doing. Because I think a lot of times, at least for me, like the doing is coming from a place of maybe a little bit of scarcity and maybe a little bit of like fear that if I don't do it, it won't get done. And then people won't like me, or I won't have security, or whatever those kind of root things are. And I don't know. I just don't think that that's very life-giving for me when I work from that place, which has been honestly like most of my life. So it's really relearning that if God calls you to it, he will be faithful to complete it. And I want to participate in that. And it is absolutely a partnership, but my like franticness, hurried pace isn't going to help the thing. And if I can do it from a place of like just quiet confidence, of just trusting that I'm going to work hard. Like I'm in a season right now where I have so much work to do and the kids are out of school and I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to get all this done. But I just keep trusting that, like, I don't know, he's put these things in front of me and I'm going to do the very best that I can. And I think he's going to equip me. And so I'm not going to stress myself out about how I'm going to get it all done, because I just have to like set a plan and just start going on it. And so it's just like a different posture towards life, really. And I'm still totally learning how to do that, but it comes from a place of peace that I'm not looking to my work or my kids or my husband or my friends to tell me that I'm valuable. I'm already sitting in a place of knowing that I'm valuable, knowing that I'm loved because of who God is. And then I can work from that place. And it's like a daily recalibrating. It's not a natural stance. I think it becomes more natural as I go on, which I'm really thankful for.
That's just so beautiful. And the process that you've been describing throughout this whole interview, really, it's not an easy process. And don't you think, I feel like there's changes people want to make in their lives, but they don't truly want to do the work it takes and make the sacrifices that you have to make to get to this place of being able to live freely and live lightly. What would you say are some of the big sacrifices that you have had to make, and maybe some things and some habits that were not serving you that you've had to remove from your life that maybe didn't feel so easy to get rid of?
Yeah. At the core of all of it for me, like I talk about it in the book, that distraction and busyness, control, comparison, self-reliance, those are like the big buckets for me that I really needed to release, because those were the things that were keeping me bound. Underneath all of those is really just a general, my eyes are on me. And I am the one who's going to protect myself. I'm the one who's going to promote myself. I'm the one who, like, it's all up to me. And that pressure is just too much. And I think that is like so contrary to actually the life that God would want for us, is that he says, put your trust in me, trust me, trust me, trust me. And so if I'm sitting over here like a genuine Jesus follower, but I don't really trust him, I really trust in my own ideas and my own ability and my own thoughts about what life should look like. And so I'm going to go after those for myself. I think that that's really more the prevalent thing, is that we're worried that no one's going to take care of us. And so we have to do it ourselves instead of really trusting that God is for us. And it is a process to learn how to trust him. And it's super uncomfortable, probably for most people. And it takes time. Like in a relationship, you don't just suddenly like trust a person. You really have to like vet that this one is really for you. And so for me, it was like, I really had to say, what is the character of God? Is he trustworthy? Do I trust him? There were times where I can remember 2 different times, which were probably some of the most pivotal moments, where I finally admitted, you know what, God, actually, I think you did that wrong. And I think I could have done better. And I'm actually really mad that you did it that way, because that sure didn't seem like the right solution. And just that like honesty in finally admitting, of course, in my head, I know that God's in control, but in my heart, I was really kind of, I don't think I was mad at God. I was more just like mistrusting him. And I just don't think he did it right. It took me just being super honest and saying, I think I could have done a better job, for me to recognize the folly in that thought that I actually think that I know better than God. Like, then that means that maybe what I think about God might be wrong. So
That's really a great awareness that you had to say, wait a minute here.
yeah.
One message you received loud and clear, and you talk about this in your book, is God saying to you, be an artist. Have you always been an artist? I know you've always been creative, but like your work is so stunning, and I'm waiting for the day you make prints so I can hang them all over my house. But what was that experience like for you when you came to understand that was next for you, that you needed to be an artist?
Yeah. So the way the process worked for me was like, there was a ton of healing that happened where I finally was like, okay, I get this. I understand, God, I trust you, and we're kind of in our rightful place. I trust that who you say I am is enough. And then I was like, okay, so now that like my heart and my soul are right, what do I do? Like, what am I supposed to do now with my life? And I just heard him say, like, be an artist. I don't think he's going to call us to something or call us a name that really doesn't resonate with us. Like, I just think if he says you are an artist, I don't think that I would sit there and be like, what are you talking about? That is not at all me. So yes, I have always been super creative. I always hesitated calling myself an artist because, I don't know, that sounds kind of fancy. And I did things like make paper flowers and, like, I didn't go to art school. But when I was a little girl, I wanted to be an artist. So it is kind of, I always think that's interesting when you look at like, what were your desires when you were like 8 years old? That probably is a good inclination of, or a good indication of kind of what God's put inside of you. Yeah, I think that for me, it was like when he said, be an artist. And I'm still today, that was like 3 years ago. Even today, I'm like, I'm deciphering my decisions based on, he says, be an artist. What does that look like then? What is the work that I'm doing? And how is it that I'm being an artist? Some of being an artist is actually doing art. But I think what he kind of taught me and is continuing to teach me is being an artist is actually having eyes to look at the world and find beauty and then capture it kind of in your own way so that you can share it with other people to help them see that beauty too. So it comes in so many different forms. For me right now, it's watercolor, but I don't ever want to get trapped into saying like, I am a watercolor artist because I don't know that he says that about me. Like at some point, maybe I'm not doing watercolor anymore, but I think he still would call me an artist. So it's kind of like letting the category be big of what he calls us and like not just getting so stuck in like one little thing, because I think it could be seasonal for some of us, but it's trusting that he says be an artist. And I'm not the very best artist by any means, but I get a lot of joy through it. And it really feels like worship. And I think kind of the way that we're supposed to live is do the things that he's called you to do in worship to him. And it will be very fulfilling.
Gosh, that's just, you said so many wonderful and beautiful things.
I said a lot of things, sorry.
No, just so much of it. I'm like, even taking notes over here as you talk. But one thing that, and I think we may have talked about this a little bit, but one thing I'm curious about is I think it's so incredible, this closeness and this knowing and this understanding and this relationship you have with God and with Jesus. And I'm curious as to how people can create that closeness. I know you said it's different for everybody and there's so many different things, but would you say you strengthen your connection and that conversation that goes back and forth with God through, is it through prayer for you, meditation, journaling? What would you say has made the biggest impact for you as far as strengthening that conversation between you guys?
I feel like I'm just repeating myself over and over again, but I honestly just think it's, do you trust God? Do you trust that he's good? And when I came to a point where I could finally say, okay, God, I actually think that you are good. And I think who you say I am is good and is enough. Like my question kind of through the whole process of this kind of spiritual journey for me was me saying like, who am I? And underneath that is, am I enough? And I know some people kind of struggle on the other side of, am I too much? I just was with a friend and she's like, that's where I am. Am I just too much? And so it's, am I enough or am I too much? And that's the question that I needed answered. But before I could get that answer, I needed to know, God, are you good? Can I trust you? And then once I get to like, yes, I can trust him, then he can inform Emily, you're enough. You're enough because I say you're enough and I made you. And so that's the foundation of the relationship. I think reading scripture is really important. And I think journaling is important and prayer is important and community is all really important. But until I actually trust that God is good and he's for me and he says that I'm enough, I don't want to just do all of the spiritual practices as a checklist. I want to do them because they're actually like building a relationship that I'm into, you know? So, and some of it is like, the more you read scripture, the more you get to know God's character and if you trust him or not, or what is confusing to you or not, the more podcasts and teachings you listen to, it does build that. So I am all for all of those spiritual practices. It's having the priorities straight, that it's not a checklist. It's not like, okay, now that I've done these things, now I'm deemed enough. I am enough. And out of that is this motivation to do these things because I care about it. And I think that this is actually what's good for me and for my family and for how I can offer myself to the world. I mean, there's lots of different spiritual practices. Reading scripture is really important. Being in community and being with friends that I have a group of friends and we actually will pray with each other, which is sometimes awkward, but I think that it's actually really healing and helpful. Time alone for me is really important for me to be quiet and hear maybe what God is kind of putting on my heart. Super hard when the kids were really little, but it's getting a little easier now. So yeah, I mean, I think it is just like prioritizing and taking time and all for the end goal of building trust.
Sounds like that's where we need to start. That's just the foundation that all of the other things are built upon. But without the foundation of trust and knowing that God is a good God, none of the other stuff really matters.
Yeah.
We got to start there. I love that. So what's next for Emily Lex? I mean, you have the whole watercolor thing. You did Freely and Lightly. I'm curious as what's on your heart for the coming future.
Next is I have a children's book that I've written and illustrated that comes out in October, actually on my birthday, October 5th.
Oh, that's my mom's birthday.
Oh, well, then I made it for your mom too.
Oh, how great.
It's a really sweet little book called Twirl, which I do talk about kind of the concept of twirling and how that's been really important to me in my journey in Fairly Lightly. And so this children's book I think that this children's book is kind of like the thing that I was always meant to do, because it's just, I've wanted to do this for so long and I love children's books. So I cannot wait for this one. I'm really proud. I'm not like an illustrator of people. I don't generally draw people. And so for this one, I had to learn how to draw a character. And it was really fun. And I'm really proud of her, the little girl that's in it. So I have that. I would love to write more children's books. I have a creative practices journal that will come out next year for Freely and Lightly. So if you read the book and you're like, okay, I want to kind of implement some of these things, there'll be this guided journal that will just kind of help with what kind of creative practices can you do to kind of grow that trust in God. So I am excited about offering that as another tool and resource. Yeah. And then, I mean, I'm like very open-handed right now saying, I don't know, God, what do you have next for me? So continuing with art, and I'd love to do more children's books. So we'll see.
Oh, I'm sure it will be the first of many. I can't wait.
I hope so.
We will add it to our collection for sure.
Okay.
All right, Emily, I'm not going to take too much more of your time. I have 2 questions that I ask all of the guests on my show. And the first one is, would you say is the number one book that has changed your life?
Oh, number one book that has changed my life. Okay, the one that comes to mind is this little tiny book by Tim Keller, and it's called Blessing of Self-Forgetfulness or something like that. And it's just really tiny, like 40 pages. It was a sermon that he wrote, and it's so easy to follow. It just changes your perspective completely. It's amazing.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. From your perspective, what does it mean to live a meaningful life?
I think that a meaningful life, gosh, isn't that a big question? I think maybe one of the things right now is just to live at peace and to have like peace inside of me and not be just like living life in a real striving, stressful, unsettled way. But just if I can get to the end of my life and be like, I feel okay inside, I think I'll be really proud of that.
Oh, great answer. And I just can't even tell you how much this conversation has meant to me today. I really appreciate it. And I know that even this conversation will change lives. So thank you again.
You're welcome. I hope so.
A huge thank you to Emily for taking the time to share her wisdom with us in this conversation. Gosh, she's just great, isn't she? You can find Emily on Instagram. She's at Emily Lex. Her beautiful work can also be found on her website, which is emilylex.com. That's EMILYLEX.com. And her book is available right now on Amazon if you'd like to read it, which I highly recommend that you do. And I got to tell you, I was so inspired by this interview and even had my own revelation after talking to her. So as you know, I love to journal, clearly. But I realized when she asked me about my own journaling practices that I spend most of my time writing memories for my family. I'm not really doing enough journaling for myself. So since we had this conversation, I have already started making more time to journal for myself and have gained some incredible insights in doing so. So thank you, Emily, for that. And I hope you'll take a moment to check out her incredible work and her new book, Twirl, when it comes out. And if you enjoyed today's show, please share it with someone you love. As always, thank you for being here, and I hope you have a wonderful day.